Hello and welcome to Into Your Life podcast. I'm Lenka and I'm joined here by my wonderful co-host Natalie.
Hi, we invite you to join our weekly conversations about finding more life in one's life.
Well, what does it actually mean?
We have discussions with guests about ways to live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives, both personally and professionally.
That sounds great. Let's go. Welcome, and I'm excited for introducing you, our lovely listeners, to another wonderful guest. Today we have someone that I've known for quite a while. We've worked together, we've talked many times, we've shared lots of interesting conversations, and I'm so grateful that I'm able to introduce you to Rachel Gotto, who is a midlife crisis coach. She's a clinical hypnotherapist. She has an incredible life journey, experiences, wisdom. She's a best-selling author, TEDx speaker. I could rave her praises for hours, but I think the best person to, share a little bit about who she is, what she does, and why she's here today, what she want to talk about today, it's Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Welcome.
Hello, thank you very much. What a lovely welcome. Thanks, Lenka. And it's we've known each other a couple of years by now, haven't we? And we've had, as you say, many conversations. So I'm feeling really, really comfortable. And thank you also, Natalie, for having me on. So where would you like me to begin?
Well, I think it would be helpful for people to get a bit of a context into, I know a bit of your journey, I know a bit of your story, but you do hypnotherapy, you help people with their midlife crisis, and I know that your life hasn't been always the easiest. So maybe we will jump into the deep end and share a little bit about your journey, about your ups and downs, and what you've learned around the road, and which, as I know, kind of led you into hypnotherapy, it led you into helping people to heal, led you into the book and everything else. So if you're okay with that, let's start with maybe where it all started.
Sure. And absolutely. I actually love sharing my story. And I was asked a question recently in a presentation, how important is it to share your story? And on the way home, I was reflecting on the answer I gave. More importantly, how important is it? And more and more and more, it is becoming something that I feel so passionate about, because I remember a time when there were no lights on in my life, quite literally. And I had very little contact with the outside world, for want of a better word. And I lived an insular life because I was suffering so greatly. And I vowed somewhere in one of those dark, long nights when I was unable to sleep, that if I made it out alive, that I would share my story, to share that even in the depths of the darkness and even in the length of a long, dark tunnel, that there are a few glints. There are what I call diamonds in the dust. And my story is a long one in terms of multiple trauma and accumulated losses and so on and so on. But my answer to the question, first of all, is that the more we share, the more we give permission to people to align themselves in some small way with our journeys. And if I had have had one person who dropped in on my life at any window and said to me, do you know what? You're not alone and you can make it. And what's more, even though it's going to take you a very long time to recover, you will still manage to live within the process of healing. If I'd have had that message, I certainly would have been energetically less isolated. It's a very long and empty and lonely journey making a recovery when you don't have any cohort, because funny enough, nobody wants to be part of your cohort when you're coming out of that stuff, because it truly is so awful. So I guess your listeners now are going to wonder, what was so awful and why are you telling this story? So I think the best place to begin probably is when I was in my mid-40s. And I suddenly landed back onto planet Earth, for want of a better word, having been absent for nearly 15 years, insofar as I stumbled back onto the planet. And for the 2.5 years before I did so, I hadn't left my house. I had suffered agoraphobia. I was coming off a prescription drug that I'd become accidentally addicted to. And my life literally turned upside down in the most awful way. And I charted 47 symptoms, both psychologically and physically, coming off that one particular drug. And I had 6 to actually detox from or withdraw from. And the reason I'm looking back and how it could have been quite so horrific, we know that coming off benzodiazepines can be an extremely difficult journey. And some of the listeners may have had that experience or may have dependency issues with benzodiazepines. We become habituated to them. And generally, they're only supposed to be prescribed for about 2 weeks at a time. I was prescribed them for over 7 years without review. So I was very, very physically dependent. And the withdrawal process was horrific. And it took my sanity. It took what was left of my physical life. And it nearly took the life of my daughter, my mother, and I, because I became psychotic and I actually lost my mind. And it was a very, very dark time. But leading up to that, there was almost a perfect storm of a bottleneck of emotional unresolved trauma. And to give you it in a nutshell, I had an extremely adverse childhood, and I had a wonderful brother who was just about a year apart from me. His name was Dominic, and we were kind of melded together. We survived a lot together. We overcome many, many challenges, and we were glued, quite simply. And he went away. When I left home, he left home. But sadly, when he left home, he became very unwell. And a couple of years later, he returned to Ireland and he said to me, I don't think I'm well. And he meant unwell with the capital U. So medical tests showed that actually he was dying from bowel cancer at the age of 26. And there was very little that could be done for him. At the time, I was an early entrepreneur and I actually had my own business when I was 23. I had a restaurant, I had a shop. I was a real girl, but my life stopped that day when he told me. And so I leased my business and I went on a tour with him around the world to see could we find a cure for him. And we went to places like Tijuana in Mexico, where a lot of the medicals had gone south of the border to practice different practices. We ended up in Germany. We ended up in different clinics all over the world. Sadly to say that Dominic didn't manage to pull through. And he sadly died on Armistice Day. And so that was the end of a chapter. And when Dominic died, I think I broke in a way that I didn't even know I was broken. And a lot of me went with him that day. And there was a lot of issues with guilt and how come it wasn't me. And, you know, some of our listeners may have that experience and it is extremely challenging. And the guilt can overcome so much of your life. And I was consumed with guilt and I felt so terrible that I hadn't been the one that went. So I was dealing with all of that. And at the same time, you know, there's always a light in the dark. And at the same time as Dominic's life was waning, a man had come into my life, and we always like a bit of romance, don't we, in some shape or form. And he was a fabulous man. He came in on a boat, actually, to my restaurant. And we really immediately became very connected. And so a romance was born out of that. And so a year after Dominic died, we decided we'd marry. And that was just fabulous. And 3 months later, even more fabulousness, I became pregnant with our first child. So I had a lot to look forward to. I was in recovery from grief. I was still going through the depths of my loss, but I had brightness in my world. And I had what I felt like was almost compensation for my loss. And secretly, I felt that Nicola, my unborn child, maybe was some element or essence of him returning in some way. It depends on what your beliefs are. But I was starting to think like that. And so you can imagine my devastation that 8 months later, Nick had drowned in a terrible accident. He went out for a routine scuba dive. I put them in the divers in the water. He had new equipment. It failed that night. And 11 divers came back, but not Nick. So to digest that, I have no words to share with you the human experience of that loss, because I simply don't think there are words. And people will be listening and they might be nodding inwardly and saying, yeah, I've been through something where there are just no words to even begin to tell the story. And I remember the night after he'd been taken into the hospital, and I was nearly 6 months pregnant. And I remember very clearly being in the kitchen with my leg up on the windowsill. It was a low window, and looking down on the ocean. We live very close to the ocean, and looking down on the ocean. And all I kept saying was, it can't be, but it is. It can't be, but it is. I wasn't, even my nervous system was not able to take in the full import of what had actually happened in my life. And so, of course, over the weeks, that it began to dawn on my conscious, but more in my body, that he was never going to be coming back. And yet, at the same time, I had to prepare to give birth to a new life when my life, in quotes, had just ended. The love in my life had gone. And that period of time is so jumbled in my memory, because at one point, I didn't want to have a child. I didn't want to. I hadn't the energy. I hadn't the capacity. What I wanted to do was go into a cupboard and shut the door and never come out again. But of course, nature being what it is, Nicola was going to come anyway, and she was going to express herself through life, and she sure did. She didn't want to come out, though. She was about 10 days hiding until she decided, okay, can't stay in here anymore, the poor child. But she did come out into the world, and she was quite ill. And so there was a lot to deal with there. And so the beginning of that journey, guys, was a complex one. We bumbled our way, basically. I didn't know how to be a mum, and Nicola didn't know how to be a kid belonging to a mother who was extremely traumatized. So we bumbled our way through it, basically. And I had a lot of support from my family. But basically, at the end of the day, as much as I was loved and cared for, I still closed the door at night. And I still had to get up to a fractious, traumatized child and be traumatized myself. So it was extremely lonely to, for want of a better word. And I was merely elementally existing. I won't pretend it was anything else. And people who are listening, they may even be people who've lost a partner in pregnancy, or indeed even lost a child. And again, we're talking about feelings and emotions that don't really have words. So we have to assume it's a bit like the aftermath of a terrible bomb. And you're just quite simply picking up fragments of life and living through the pockets that you get, that moment of peace in grief. You just got to go with it. That chink in the light, you go with it, because the rest of the time it's about coping and finding ways to get literally through the days and the nights. Today, I would be diagnosed with complex PTSD. I had flashbacks. I was completely unable to sleep, rest, think. I had pain all over my body. I was a pathology, I presume. But in those days, we didn't have words for it, and we didn't have diagnoses. And I'm wondering, even looking back, maybe it was better that they weren't. Maybe it's better that I stayed in cope mode and survival mode. I don't know, because I could only rely on the innate strength that I was given. And they didn't fail me. And it's so interesting, guys. I was never failed by my innate strength, my innate instinct. And I still have this whole belief today that we are equipped with incredible capacity. And so many people say to me, oh, I wouldn't have been able to survive that. I definitely wouldn't. And my answer immediately is, you haven't been asked, thank goodness. But don't worry, you've got a huge amount of tools in that toolbox that you can dip into at any point in time, and particularly when your back is against the wall, because I found that, and I have spoken to other, and I don't use the word thriver as that survivor, excuse me. I like to use the word thriver rather than survivor. I have spoken to other people who have come through major traumas, and they all speak about this strength that kicks in. It's not fun. Don't for 1 minute think you're having fun through it, but there is something that we all possess. And I really love people to know that they do have that within them. It's such an insurance clause for us that we will survive. And somebody gave me a quote, which is, the human spirit is stronger than anything that can happen to it. And I really like that quote. I really do. So will we move on with the story, or have you got questions?
Well, I think, let's see if you have more of the story. And I know that we're gonna come to your recovery, you finding those little pieces and glimpses of light and tapping into your inner resilience and this ability to heal yourself, because you have healed yourself. Your story is of healing trauma and recovery through your own innate ability. So I think that's what I'm curious about. I think our listeners are curious about. Well, you seem to be thriving now. You seem to be, doing well and overcame all of those things that happened to you. So what happened?
Right. Well, it continued. And some people say, did you ever question whether you were jinxed or not? Or, did you ever question whether you just born under an unlucky star? And genuinely, my answer is no, I don't believe that. I don't believe that there is an energy in this solar system that picks out one or two people. I think it is just the way we are as humans. We all suffer, and we all suffer in different ways. And sometimes suffering is visible and sometimes it's not. But I don't believe personally that I was picked out, because as the story continues, if it is possible, it got worse. And people might be saying, how could it possibly have got any worse from the fact that you have lost two incredible people? You have now got a child, no father. You are extremely traumatized. Your daughter's very ill and in and out of hospital. How could it have got worse? And that was probably simply my own inability to accept that it could have got worse, because it was getting worse. My life was getting worse and worse, if we can use that silly phrase. And what was happening was I was beginning to some days not know how to drive my car. So I might jump into the car, put Nicola in the back, and then my hand wouldn't quite meet the gear stick. But again, I was so miserable. I didn't even really notice, to be honest. I was just so used to feeling miserable. It was just another thing that didn't work temporarily. So then I might come from the shops and find I was driving literally on the wrong side of the road. Good job I lived in the country and very quiet country roads. And then I just go, what was I doing on the wrong side of the road, and correct myself. And then one day I felt as if my head was being pulled out the window of the car. And it did cross my mind at that moment, am I being possessed? Why would I try and stick my head out the window to drive a car, and I've got a kid and a dog in the back? It's the only time it really occurred to me that that's a bit strange. But it really came to a head almost when I started to lose the use of my left leg at night. So Nicola was very sick, and I would take multiple bottles to her to try and make her sleep. And then I ended up crawling, and it never occurred to me really that this is unusual. Why on earth you crawling? And when I tell this story now, I want to slap my forehead and go, how did you not know that losing the use of your leg is a sign of serious illness? But maybe we can take it as a learning that sometimes things get so bad that we don't notice that our own physical health is in major decline. And it is a wake-up call, I think, for all of us to check in and say simply, is this right? Is this normal? Ask some questions of ourselves, because I, in my traumatized state, did not realize that that was abnormal. So it really came to a head because I came to on my back with Nicola sitting astride me, screaming, "Don't die, don't die." She found me unconscious. Then we found out, as I was rushed to hospital, that I had a massive, benign, rapidly growing brain tumor in the right-hand side of my brain. And I remember clearly the day. I was very dazed, but they were, in those days, there were black and white screens, and I saw them looking at the screen and whispering and nodding, and I was thinking, even I can see that. And they didn't tell me for ages, but even I could see there was something in there. But it didn't occur to me. I just thought, I'll be going home in a minute, basically. And so they came to me and told me that I had a very serious condition and I had a life-threatening condition. And unfortunately, they didn't think that there would be a surgeon anywhere that would be able to operate. It was an extremely vascular, which means it was very blood-led tumor. And their message was to go and put my affairs in order and to write my will and to make preparations for Nicola's care. She was about 5. So I'm just reflecting. I remember lying in the hospital bed that evening, and they were giving me a loading dose of epilepsy drugs to try and keep me stable. And I remember thinking, this feels like it's not real, and this is going to be over tomorrow. I'm going to be going out for a glass of wine with somebody tomorrow. Took a while for me to really understand that this was real, and this was another thing I was going to have to deal with. So I toured a couple of hospitals, to be honest. I went to a couple in Dublin, and they had a wee look at my scans, and same thing. No, I'm so sorry. Your life will not continue as it should do, and likely you'll survive 2 more years ish, and then you will have an aneurysm, and that, I'm afraid, they won't be able to save you. So I suppose people might be getting an idea now at this point in time that I don't give up very easily. So I wasn't allowed to fly, but we went to England. I went with a great girlfriend, and we went and toured hospitals again, and we were looking for answers. Is there anyone? And the response was exactly the same every single time. It's not possible. We do not have the technology to deal with something like this, maybe in years to come. So anyway, do not give up, guys. Never, ever, ever imagine that door is shut, because at the 11th hour, my sister-in-law had a neighbor who knew somebody who was a neurologist, blah, blah. I won't give you the chain. But actually, I ended up on the doorstep of a man called Richard Nelson in the Frenchy Hospital in Bristol. It is now closed. It's an old military hospital. He was a maverick neurosurgeon, well known for taking on hopeless cases. Sent my scans, and he wrote back to me. We didn't even have email. My goodness, when you think about it, I got a piece of paper, and I'm so sorry I didn't keep it. And it basically read, "Dear Mrs. Gotto," he was very formal, "I've checked your scans. Your brain tumor seems to me as if it might be operable. However, if you do survive the surgery, you will be paralyzed down the left-hand side of your body for the rest of your life. Basically, have a little think about it. Yours sincerely, Mr. Nelson." So, old-fashioned way, "Dear Mr. Nelson, thank you so much. I'll take you up on your offer if you don't mind. And I'll be delighted to share up in Bristol to have life-saving surgery if it's on the table." So that's exactly what I did. I had a preparatory surgery in London first. It was really cutting edge for its time, and they glued shut a couple of my arteries in my brain, which that in itself was so risky, because it's like putting super glue into your brain too soon. It's not going to work. Too late. It's not going to work. You're going to die either way. So they got that right, which was fabulous. So I endured 15 hours in neurosurgery in Bristol, and I don't remember very much about any of that. You can listen to my TED talk for what I remember in terms of my between worlds. But in terms of understanding my future, it was probably 10 days after surgery or some, and I couldn't turn over in bed. It was the first time I was conscious about being in my body again and trying to turn over, and nothing happened. And to cut a long story short, Mr. Richard Nelson was right. So now I was faced with paralysis down one side of my body completely. And I know it would sound a bit trite, but the import of that knowledge that I had lost everything else. I had no time to process anything. I was like an unexploded bottle of not champagne, but, you know, and then my freedom, I couldn't escape. Up until then, I was able to escape. I was able to move. I was able to deal in some way by moving. Now I was transfixed. I was in a bed and I could not get away from myself. And I will never forget that moment of, now it's really, really, really serious. What am I going to do now? So it was very much a very tough time, I can tell you. There were no diamonds in the dust at that point. I wasn't able to find any light at that moment in time. And I remember feeling extremely vulnerable and deserted, and like it was like the fun had gone. Like, even though I wasn't having fun anyway, it was like the fun had now gone from anything. My potential was gone. So it was a long, long, long journey. I was in a brain injury unit, learning to live the way I was now. And it was about a month or so into it, my big toe twitched. And to cut a long story short, there was a bit of a, oh, maybe there is life in her body yet. And oh, maybe there is potential for something. And I was like I was like a dog with a bone. I wanted to win. I wanted to walk. I wanted everything. When they went home at the weekends in the unit, I was constantly working in my room. I was constantly getting myself upright. I was constantly working. I was terrified that I was losing ground. If there was any ground to be gone, I knew enough that the brain, we get it in the early days after a major brain injury. The more we do in the early days, the better it is. So I was relentless. And over time, my leg started to work. I had no use of my left arm and shoulder and hand at all. But there came a day when I rang my brother and I said, I need to come home to Ireland. I won't get well in England. I want to be among my own. I want my daughter back. I want my life back. I want to be among my own people. And so it took a bit of convincing, but I gapped it and I flew. He came and got me and he flew and brought me home. And that was the beginning. I have to say, it's so important in any recovery journey to be in a place where you feel you're going to get well as best as possible. If that's a place, a person, an animal, an energy, the sea, the ocean, whatever it is, I now know that we need to bring ourselves to the correct environment, if at all possible. And so I got myself back to the ocean. I got myself back to the place I was familiar with. I knew the smells, the sound, everything. And I immediately mentally improved just by that very fact alone. So the journey was to recover. And it's a long recovery journey, I can tell you. And unfortunately, I started to have major seizures. And so we started to add in loads and loads of medication. And to cut a long story short, I became a prescription drug addict. And this is where we come loop back to the beginning of the story. I took 2.5 years to withdraw from one drug. And as I said, it nearly took my life. So I landed back onto planet Earth in my mid-40s after all of that, not having worked for over 20 years, having experienced a lot of depths of life, having been quite simply with my chin in the gutter for a very, very long time. And over time, I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, I had something to offer people. And so that was the beginning of the recovery journey. In total, the recovery journey took a long time, but that was the first day. And it began on the 27th of May, 2013, when I smiled for the first time in years.
Wow. Yeah. Your story is, something that maybe not everyone can imagine the depths because you've been through so many things, but everyone can imagine bits. We've all been through trauma, smaller, bigger, and it really just the feeling from you that, anything is figurable, that we can figure things out and not giving up, literally, as I said, till the final moment where there's no other way. I really appreciate this kind of a message, and it really gives so much energy to the world, for people, no matter what's happening, just don't give up. But now we're on to the recovery and your journey to where you are right now, what you do to help others to live better lives, to help them to with confidence and meaning and fulfillment. And obviously you are now certified clinical hypnotherapist. You have achieved so much since the recovery. So tell us a little bit more about what was this journey about.
I remember my biggest fear. I wanted to work again, and I had half trained in acupuncture, I'd half trained in psychotherapy, and for obvious reasons I never ever got anywhere with it. So my biggest fear was, what do I tell people when I can go and train to be something? What do I tell people about my CV? I was absolutely petrified about rocking up and saying, yeah, hello, I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, and somebody saying, what do you, where's your track record or something? And I remember somebody very cleverly saying to me, your CV is in your past, if you didn't know, Rachel. And I think this is also an important message for people is, we seem to identify ourselves as our qualifications, and we don't rope in all the times when we had to drag ourselves through something, or we figured a way through it, or we became ingenious. That's all our CV. And so it took me ages to have the courage to import this CV that was going to actually be, hopefully, the turning point for so many people. And it took me a while. So clinical hypnotherapy came about because I realized, if anyone's listening to this, I'm lifting up my left hand. Now, I was left-handed naturally, and I had to become right-handed to be able to write again. And I never regained the full use of my left hand. So if we think about neuroplasticity in action, that is simply an example of it, perfect example. A woman who's naturally left-handed dominant becomes right-handed dominant. I was fascinated with my own brain's ability to rewire. There was a point when I couldn't even remember what I'd done yesterday. How did I gain back mental agility to that degree? That is ridiculous. I wasn't even able to remember how old Nicola was most of the time. But it came through literally exercising my brain, remembering things, walking, breath work, cold water, challenges, overcoming more challenges, and so on. So I gained mental agility, and I was thinking, hang on a second, if we can do this physically, surely we can do this for people's minds, their mental health, how they operate in the world, how they literally think about themselves. So to me, clinical hypnotherapy was a natural profession for me to take on board, so that I could simply bring neuroplasticity in action back into the therapy world. I am passionate about it. When we go into somebody's unconscious mind and we rewrite the program that's been run inside, and we upgrade it with a new program, new beliefs, new thoughts, new emotions and feelings, it is simply talk therapy on steroids. In my opinion, the results are incredible. So I have been blessed with a massive career in clinical hypnotherapy, working with over 500 one-to-one clients. And later after that, I trained as a coach because I wanted to have the skills to help people process the changes that were going on in their lives. Predominantly, though, I'm still passionate. I was born to be a clinical hypnotherapist. And then piggybacking on that, I wrote a book called Flying on the Inside, which is my memoir, the story of my recovery, and so on. It's sort of expanded into speaking, a TEDx talk. And now I find I get just as much joy sharing the good news that no matter what's happened in our lives, ingeniously, we can recalibrate, we can recreate, and we can live differently again, with joy, with contentment, and with the sense of connection to life that we wouldn't have thought possible. It takes work and it takes time, but it is possible.
And it is possible not only through working with someone like yourself, to have a coach, to have a hypnotherapist, but you also teach self-hypnosis. So we can do lots of for ourselves. So could we just for a second look at, maybe we've heard those terms before, hypnotherapy, self-hypnosis, but could you explain a little bit in layman's terms, what does it mean? What does it do in our brain? And how can someone actually start taking themselves through this process if they don't feel that they want to work with someone, they want to figure out how to do it by themselves?
For sure. Okay, I think the most exciting thing to know is that we actually go into hypnosis naturally every day. So you may remember going into a daydream when you go, oh, where was I? And time flies when you're in a daydream. Why? Because you're actually delving into your unconscious mind. You're just going home. You're going in there. And we just live in that realm. Or driving home and you can't remember driving home. That is coming home on a program. And this is a perfect example. How on earth does your left arm know to go indicate here and turn here when you're chatting on the phone? Because you've got a program. So simply, we all have an unconscious mind. We all utilize it and we all respond to it. And the important thing is to respond. So the conscious mind, which is approximately 5% of the mind, is, as it said, the conscious bit. It's the planning mind. It's the lateral thinking. It's the pragmatics. It's the creative. And it can do an enormous amount of good. But we've got 95% of the mind is unconscious, and it is the emotional mind, it's the feeling mind, and it's the mind that has put interpretations on every single thing that's happened to us since conception. So if you imagine your unconscious mind is like a massive bank of snapshots of every single thing that's happened to you, and add on to that most of our beliefs about ourselves and life were acquired before the age of 7, before we become conscious, before we're able to decide is something good for us or bad for us, or that person is good or dysfunctional or functional. So we form all of these beliefs and we leave those in the unconscious mind. They don't suddenly get evaporated as we grow up. They come with us. So what happens is we're responding to unconscious suggestions every single day of our lives. And the law in psychology is that the unconscious will always defeat the conscious. So we're running a battle if we're trying to use our conscious mind to overcome difficulties when we've got this massive emotional bank overriding it. So what good is that to us? Right. Well, the unconscious mind is a very powerful source. We've learned that. It can wreak havoc on our lives. But if it can wreak havoc, we can train it to do the opposite. So easy to go into hypnosis. We can naturally do it. We do it ourselves. But if we do it consciously and we make it as a specifics, then we are open to more suggestion. That's simply the difference. We humans are suggestible. We're more suggestible when we're in unconscious mind. So if you want to give yourself better suggestions, simply settle yourself into a chair, cut out all the interference, and give yourself permission to come home. Close your eyes and use whatever method you like. I generally use stairs or an elevator. Talk yourself down 10 steps. And each time you say, going deeper, going deeper, going deeper. So take your time doing that. It should take you about 2-3 minutes going down the stairs, and constantly tell yourself, going deeper, going deeper, going deeper. When you get to the bottom of that stairs, use your brilliant imagination to give yourself better suggestions. So create an environment that is really resonant with you, feeling peaceful, feeling safe, feeling resonant with yourself. And when you get to that favorite place, maybe get yourself a favorite chair in your mind's eye, plonk yourself back into that chair. And now is the time you give yourself those amazing suggestions. You're an incredible person. You have an amazing capacity. You are beautiful. You were born good enough, and you've always been good enough. And you have a super brain. You've got a Ferrari of a brain. You can recall anything you need to. You are a thriver. You are excellent. So fill that in and make the chemistry to match the words. When you've done that, calmly, gently, carefully leave your chair. Tell yourself that you can come back here at any moment in time, that this is your suggestible place, and gently, calmly come back up those stairs. And as you're coming up the stairs, tell yourself when you come back to your full awareness, you will be awake, aware, as if your eyes have been bathed in spring water and you are fully present, capable, and ready to face your day. Very easy. The results, if you keep it up and repeat it, can be extraordinary.
I'm like gobsmacked, not the right word, speechless, I guess that's what it is. And me being speechless, it doesn't happen often. But thank you for sharing that from your, because I've not met you before, I've not heard your journey, and obviously Lenka has heard it before, and it's been an amazing journey, if I dare use the word amazing, because there's so many lessons in there. So a very simple question here, and it's something I'm not 100% sure of, is what is the difference between hypnotherapy and clinical hypnotherapy? Because I've heard both described, but I don't necessarily, and I'm sure there's some of our listeners who don't necessarily know, what is the difference between regular hypnotherapy or just hypnotherapy and clinical hypnotherapy? Can you just help me to understand that?
Sure. In terms of how anyone would work, no difference. It's to do with the length of the training. So somebody who has clinical hypnotherapy status, they will have done extra training on top of basic hypnotherapy training. So I did an extra 450 hours on top of my training in order to be able to use the term clinical hypnotherapy. But in technical terms, it makes absolutely no difference. I like to also say it's for somebody who's done their medical hypnotherapy training, but that's just personal. I also work with physical difficulties as well, because we do know there's palliative care, there's pain control. All of that is very, very effective using hypnosis. So I kind of like to put it into those terms. But in terms of somebody's training, you'd need to check it out to see, have they got basically the experience, and have they got the clinical practice behind them? I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. It's been something I've been, I've wanted to ask somebody for that for ages. So thank you. You're in the right spot at the right time. And thank you for that really simple tool to put ourselves into that state so that we can, as you said, deal with the subconscious mind, because that's just going and going. The conscious mind, takes a break and goes off on a different tangent, while the subconscious can just keep on at that same old wound, just going ding, 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 ding all the time.
For sure.
Yes, I get how the subconscious mind is stronger than the conscious mind, and the way that you described that was really great. Just going back a little bit is, and I know we're talking about where you're at now and what you've achieved. This is purely because I'm curious to know, is what got you deciding to come back, or like you said, come back to earth? What got you to decide, right, that's it, I've had enough now, I want to stop taking these pills that I am addicted to? Because I know that there's that moment, especially within addiction, that you have to make that decision. And I'm quite a curious person, and I'm always fascinated. What is it that would make what is that moment that would make somebody say, stand up and say, I'm an alcoholic, that was my defining moment, or I'm a drug addict, that's my defining moment? And it's more for my curiosity, is what was your moment where that's it, no more with these pills?
Sure. It took me a very, very long time to figure out that actually it was addiction. The narrative that I was given was that I have a massive acquired brain injury, and that I'm not ever going to have brain function the way I was used to years ago, although I'd lost sight of that anyway. I didn't really know what normality should be, or a woman of my age should be experiencing. But it came to a head, and people can read this in my memoir. I started to become compulsive and impulsive. So I made some absolutely mad decisions. I was on 6 prescribed medications 4 times a day. So they were all designed to keep my brain from allowing me to have seizures. So if you imagine, they tamp down your responses, but also they tamp down your inhibitions, and they tamp down your ability to decide whether something's right or wrong. I mean, your brain is quite simply dulled down. So I took Nicola at the age of 8 to live in Italy. I had a boyfriend, an Italian boyfriend, but I just literally left and went to live in Italy, which was quite crazy because I wasn't well and Nicola needed more support. But that didn't come into my realm. And it was really when we were in Italy, we stayed 2 years. I couldn't ever sleep, ever. And I noticed that I saw people having fun, but I recognized that actually I was acting, having fun, that I couldn't feel anything at all. I got very, very good at pretending about everything. And then I started to slide into the most horrific depression. I had no control over it. I was exhausted all the time. So basically, and then I developed anxiety. So I was trying to keep a lid on everything, but actually the quality of my life was declining. I can see it's getting dark here, guys. And for anyone who's listening, we're trying to record this during a storm and I'm on an island. So if anyone's watching, you'll see I'm suddenly disappearing into the darkness. So basically, I came back to Ireland and I recognized that something wasn't right. So I went to a neurologist and I said, listen, is this my lot or is there anything else? Oh, no, it's your lot. My gut instinct kept saying there's something else. And this is what I speak about, is this gut instinct. We weren't given it as an accident. It sure is our self-preservation mechanism. So that led me, even though my brain was so tamped down, it led me to keep questioning. And so I went to another neurologist and basically took a massive load of my medications. And I said, here, if one of those could be creating even a minuscule amount of my difficulties, is there any one you'd pick? And he tapped one and he went, that one could be. And I said, so what do I do? And he said, just stop taking it. So I did. And I cannot tell you strongly enough how horrific that experience was. I just stopped taking a drug I was physically dependent on and had been for 7 years. I went into delirium, DTs. I was in serious danger. And fortunately, couple of hours later, as I was imagining I had worms in my mouth and beetles running around my wrists and I was in horror, that gut instinct said, take the drug again. And I did. And I reverted back to that awful state. So that taught me something, the comparison. So I actually, for the first time in my whole time there, took out my computer and wrote in that drug. And lo and behold, all the information was there. And even more interesting, Natalie, I found a whole group of people, a whole cohort of people silently suffering on forums who had no medical help whatsoever. And I learned through that forum how to safely and carefully withdraw from that medication. The wisdom at the time was not sufficient in the medical fraternity. They were saying quarter it, quarter it, quarter it. That was way too much. There were people finding intolerable symptoms, even to the point that they were ending their own lives. It is such a serious affair to withdraw from benzodiazepines after long-term taking them. So that journey that's how that journey began, just wondering if the quality of my life was cemented in concrete or was there more? And lo and behold, Natalie, as I lost that drug, I suffered. But by goodness, when that drug was out of my system long enough, I simply was able to feel, think, and smile. And I had this sense of I was connected again to life. And so it was quite a phenomenal journey. So there was a pivotal moment.
Thank you for sharing that, because one of the things that we often talk about, you know, Lenka and myself, or even with some of her guests, is about having this control, taking back control over our health or our emotions, whatever it is taking back control. And you did that. You took back control. It doesn't always mean that it's easy. It's not necessarily an easy, oh yes, skipping down with unicorns down the rose petal pathway. It can be a real challenge, and whether it's physical or mental, but it's taking back that control and finding the solutions or finding ways that work. Because, when you sort of think about, coming off alcohol or drugs or something, is that they're cold turkey, it's always, go cold turkey. And it's not always the right solution to just go cold turkey. Is maybe there needs to be that weaning process, but it's working out what it is, because it's also taking back control by finding that help. Like you said, the doctors were no help. The neurosurgeons who you would think would have the right answers for you were just like, well, but you had to go and find the forums, find your cohorts, as you said, to doing it. And there's so many different ways that, myself and listeners can take that as a lesson. It's whether it's finding a new career, whether it's finding a new path in your life, whether it's finding out about your health or whatever it is, it's find your cohorts, find the help that you can get, because it is out there. It might not be with a big flashing light going, here it is, check me out, blink, 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 in the neon blues and yellows and pinks. It might require a bit of effort to look for it, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So I love that you shared that, because I think there's a lot of wisdom behind that journey that you had. And just wanting to find out is, like you say, you've had this brain surgery and you've had all these experiences. What if you really find the good in that? And what is the positive that's come out of that, and the strengths that's come out of it, other than the surviving? Because I think, like you said, as humans, we are designed to survive. We are designed to survive what's thrown at us. But what do you... I'm trying to get my brain to to connect. Is not connecting, but the thing is trying to find what is the silver lining to what has happened, just to share, because somebody might be going through something at the moment and listening to this, and like you said, to have heard somebody say you're going to be okay, you'll come out of it, is having gone through something like that. I've not experienced that level of trauma in my life. So I don't necessarily know what would be a positive to come out of it, or a silver lining. Am I making any sense here?
You totally are, Natalie. Absolutely are. And thank you for asking that question, because it is really, really important to understand that. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, he was the first person to actually coin the phrase post-traumatic growth. And, I was asked this question only on Friday at another presentation. There are so many what ifs, could ifs, all of those. We live with all of those. And we spend a lot of our time in trauma saying what if and if only, really. And the journey is long, it's arduous. We can't paint a pretty picture on it, because it's disingenuous to the people who are suffering right now. But what I will say is that even in the midst of the depths of our losses, of our misery, of our trauma, there are moments, there are pockets of peace or normalcy. There are those moments, and it is important to watch out for them. It's important to write them down, to remind ourselves. I used to have post-it notes in the house to say, yesterday I felt this, because I knew that the next day I might not remember that I had. So it's about being conscious of our experience. And also it's about trying not to fight our way out of it too soon, because some things have to take their course. If we've had a bereavement, you're not going to brainstorm your way out of it. You're not going to fight your way out of that in a moment. It's about allowing yourself to come into the moment and embrace the loss, which is a terrible bit of advice, but it is the truth. We have to acknowledge where we're at, and we have to allow ourselves to organically come through the process, as well as keeping in our mind a little bit of the future and a little bit of keeping the eyes on the road. But don't worry, if you're going through that, guys, you will naturally figure your own little dynamic around it and through it. So that's important. And it is important to know that in the future, not now, not necessarily now, but in this very near future, the sunshine is going to shine again. It's going to shine differently. You are forever changed, but you will grow into liking and being familiar with the new version of yourself. I remember saying to somebody after Nick had drowned, I said, I don't know if I even like who I am anymore. I was so unfamiliar to myself. But let me tell you, looking back down that tunnel of all that loss and trauma, I truly am, without a shadow of a doubt, now I've come to this point in my life, I am grateful. I am grateful for all my experiences. I am grateful for being humbled, because this is the truth I'm going to share with you. I don't know how humble I would have been if I hadn't have had the corners knocked off me. And that can sound really trite. Somebody could say, well, you could have picked an easier route, Rachel. For me, that was my route. Whatever came onto my path was my route. I genuinely believe it. And the route to my recovery is my own. And somehow I divined it and found it and fought for it, whatever it was. And you too will find your route through that. And you too can find diamonds in the dust, only the smallest pockets, but link them together and remind yourself that there were moments until the sun comes out in its own unique way for you. You can live through this, and you will be different. You will never be the same person. It sounds so frightening, I know. But believe me, if you consciously work on this, you will have a pride that nobody can take away from you. You will have a love of life. You will have a love for yourself if you work it right. And forgiveness is key to every single thing that you do through this journey. Forgiveness and self-love, very important. So I hope that answers your question, Natalie. I went off in a bit of a tangent, but I squeezed in a few bits.
Wow, that's it. We're done. That's it. Shut down. Thank you so much. That was really great. And we really appreciate you sharing your story with us, sharing your time, and slowly going into the dark there. It's quite funny to watch, but
I'm disappearing.
Just before you totally and utterly disappear, we do always, and I appreciate you shared a lot, but I'm assuming that there's maybe a little more in there. Is we always ask our guests, is there a last sort of few top tips, or a gold nugget of wisdom, or even something we haven't asked that you would like to share with the audience? Now's the time to just, any of those three or one of each, that's fine. Now's the time to just share that last little bit, that last thought.
Thank you. I just had a quick think inside. I think what I'd like to leave us with is, don't be too constrained about who you are in the becoming of. Don't have too much of an ideal or too much of a rigid notion, because we are evolving every single moment of our lives and our days. And yeah, I've evolved through a lot of trauma, but we can translate my story into just everyday stuff. And I think the key is about letting go of the notion. Yes, we need goals and we need ideas and we need, forward-thinking patterns, but it's also allowing ourselves to almost like organically meld in with what's going to be right, and use the power of your mind as a creative element. If you don't check what you think about and what you allow your mind to visualize, you're wasting that wonderful creative element that the mind possesses. And if you want to listen to epigenetics and what Bruce Lipton speaks about, he says we're like a crystal broadcasting out. And I learned that years ago, that I need to broadcast out to the universe what I really want to be like, feel like, express like, so that I create the same energy coming back. So if you're in leadership, or if you're in the becoming of something, remember that your strongest port of call is your mind and your gut. Use your gut instinct and use your mind wisely and well, and divine what you want, because you're an all-powerful individual, uniquely created for a specific reason. We humans are not accidents. And hopefully we can be kind in the process and look after the animals and nature and people around us who need us to help them, and use that. That's success to me, guys. And I'm sure you agree. Great
advice. And I love that as a final thought, and just so powerful as well. Now, for our listeners, if they're thinking, you know what, I have got to talk to this lady, I've got to reach out to her, I need her help, or I know somebody who could benefit from your help, from your coaching, or I just need to be in this woman's circle, how can they connect with you? How can they find you?
And it's so nice of you to ask. Thank you. Well, daily, I suppose Instagram is a really good place to know what I'm up to, which is at Rachel, V for Victoria, Gotto. So you'll find me on Instagram, and I post most days when I've got something important to say. I'm on LinkedIn at Rachel Gotto. I'm also on a website called rachelgotto.com. And you can read my memoir, Flying on the Inside. It's available from Amazon, and my TED Talk is up on YouTube. So there's loads of ways that people can stay in touch. And of course, if you want to write to me specifically, you could find my email address on my website. I'm always happy to hear from people.
Thank you so much. And all these links, including your memoirs and your TED Talk, will be in the comments or in the description, so people can find them there. So that was great. Thank you so much for braving the storm, and thank you, techno gods, for behaving like fun. I say 5 minutes, but it's not been longer than that. But thank you for sharing your story, for sharing your energy with us today, for all that wisdom and knowledge that you have imparted. And we really appreciate your time, and even though you are, as you said, stranded on an island, which can sound quite fantastical, is thank you for still, coming here and making the effort to be here. We really appreciate it. And for our listeners, if there's anything that this talk has triggered in you, or inspired in you, or just has guided you, please do share with us. Have you experienced something like this, or do you know somebody who's going through this, who needs that support, or needs somebody in their corner? Please do reach out to us. Let us know if there's any way that we can help you. Is there any way that we can guide you to some of our speakers, or even Rachel? Is there something that we can do, or is there a story that you would like to share with us, and you would like to come and share your story here? We would love to hear it. We'd love to share it with our listeners. And in the way, until our next conversation, we look forward to talking to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. If you enjoyed listening to our conversation, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe. We would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and write a short review.